Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about having a shared language for English 1010. I know you've probably watched a lot of videos this week, but one of the reasons I like to do this up front is so that if you have any questions, you really know what questions to ask before we get started for the semester. So why do we have a shared language in this class? Well, composition is a field of study, just like any other subject that you might study at MTSU. And we, just like any other field of study, have certain words or terms that we use so that when you're in a class like this and it's a writing workshop, you'll be able to hear those terms and be able to apply it to your writing. So having this shared language is going to help you know, first of all, how to start your writing projects, and then second of all, how to utilize feedback. One of the things you'll hear me talk about a lot this semester is the rhetorical situation. So the rhetorical situation involves audience, purpose, and exigence. And you may hear the rhetorical situation incorporating other things or maybe using other words. You can look that up online and see what I'm talking about. But essentially it all involves this idea that you are writing, first of all, to a particular audience. So I always invite students to pause for a second and think about how they might ask their mother or their best friend for money. And how might that different if you're asking for money from, let's say, Dr. Sidney McPhee, the president of MTSU? Hopefully, some people always say, oh, I would do that the same, but hopefully it would be a little bit different. Same thing if you're writing to, let's say, the Board of Education, right? Let's say that they made a decision you were unhappy with. You would have to consider the board and those members. So audience can be one person or it can be multiple people. And you would have to think about how you would convince them to listen to whatever it is you're saying. All right, we'll continue with that example moving forward. So purpose, this is sort of why you're writing something. And your purpose is connected closely, of course, with your subject matter. Exigence you may not have heard of before. This is the driving force behind your writing. So let's go with that school board example. Maybe they made a decision and you were listening from home on your computer to that school board and you were unhappy with the decision. That would be your driving force behind why maybe you would write a letter to the board. So all of these things are really important because you have to really consider all of these things in order to do your best work and have your writing actually be effective. Another word you'll hear me say a lot this semester is genre. So a genre is a particular type of writing. That's what we mean when we say genre in a composition course. You may think of the word genre, maybe you've heard of that before when you were thinking about music. So there are different genres of music like country or R&B. Maybe you've thought about genre if you're a reader and you're thinking, oh, it's kind of like there are romance novels and there are mystery novels. Well, sure. So in a composition class, genre is the type of writing that you're doing. So I'm going to give you a few examples on the screen. I'll backtrack in a minute. These are 4 different genres of writing. And just at first glance, you can see how, yes, they're all writing, but how different they are. So this first one is a lab report. And as you can see, it's about green algae. And lab reports, and here's the thing about genres, they're all going to have certain conventions that are you're expected to see or expected to write in each one. So in a lab report, we would expect to see an abstract, an introduction, you would see materials and methods, you would obviously have a results section or a discussion of results. And so you would need to do those things for it to be a lab report. There might be some variety on that, but there are going to be certain things that will always be there. Let's compare that to the next genre of writing. This is a cover letter. Unlike the lab report, which would be expected to be multiple pages, a cover letter is going to be much shorter. We usually expect to see around a page of writing with the cover letter. And you're going to be writing in the cover letter about yourself. So even the subject matter is going to be very different compared to that lab report. Just like the lab report, there are certain expectations in the cover letter as well. Let's compare that to a news article, and this is one that you're seeing in print, right? That news article is actually going to be really different looking if you access it via the web. So there are all kinds of different components that come into play when you're knowing a particular genre and how it's going to be published. As you can see with the articles, there are more elements of design that are incorporated. So we have a picture of the Capitol building in one. We have pull quotes, so little quotes pulled up that stand out in our magazine article. So if you hear me say genre this semester, it means that I'm expecting a particular type of writing, and I'm expecting you to meet certain conventions of those genres. This semester, you'll also hear me mention the writing process. You're probably familiar with it. It's the phase of going through pre-writing or brainstorming to drafting, getting sentences down on the page, shaping up your thoughts, revising, making those big scale changes, adding a lot of content, deleting content, moving things around. I always tell students when I was revising my master's thesis, I remember cutting out 20 pages of writing, and everyone usually gasps in horror. But yeah, revising is making big scale changes. Editing is making small scale changes like looking for typos. We definitely don't do the editing phase until we are feeling pretty confident that we're done with the revision phase. And then publishing is when your work is done and you're sharing it with your audience. That looks like a nice perfect circle, a nice easy cycle, but we all know that that is not exactly what happens. So sometimes you get to the revision phase, for example, and you have to go back to the brainstorming phase. Maybe you realize you don't have enough content to work with, or maybe you realize you wanted to go in a certain different direction. So this is not perfect, and you'll need to remember that. It's much more like a maze. I envision a maze when I think about the writing process, because you get started, you may go down one route and realize that you got to back up, change directions, go a different way, and eventually you get out of the maze, right? So it's just something to kind of keep in mind as you're working through the writing process this semester. All right, so some different things we are going to focus on, some words you need to know as we are going through the writing process. The first one is content. Content is what I refer to when I'm talking about what you're writing about. It's the meat of your writing. It's all those ingredients put together to make up what it's about. All right, content is really important in this class. You'll hear me talk a lot about depth when it comes to content. We want to make sure that we are not just telling something, we're really showing it. So I'm going to work with you on creating that depth in the content this semester. Organization refers to the order of things. So when I talk about organization, I may be talking about the piece overall. For example, if you're writing an argumentative piece, maybe you start with your weakest point and work your way up to your strongest point. That would be the overall organization. Organization also refers to the way the paragraphs themselves are put together. So it can be whole scale organization or small scale organization. Style refers to how you write something. So it's going to be your tone, your voice, your sentence structure, the word choice that you use, all of those things that make up your sentences and make them come to life. It's how you hear your own. Again, if you've written something and you're like, oh, that sounds like me, right? That's your style. Design you heard me refer to earlier. This has to do with everything from the font that you use, the color scheme that you use, the white space on the page, if you incorporate pictures, charts, graphs, how it's all put together and how it looks, that is the design. Editing you heard in the writing process. Editing in this case means your ability to, again, incorporate punctuation, look for typos, things like that. And then finally, you'll hear me use the word research and citations this semester. So research refers to your ability to find reliable sources and use and incorporate those responsibly in your writing. Citations refer to how you show that you've done the research. It allows you to give that signal to your reader so that they know that your information came from a particular place and they can actually go and find it themselves. And lastly, I want to remind you of assignment sheets this semester. It's the most important document in the writing course because it is your instructions or your how-to for the course. The first part of my assignment sheets tell you the purpose and the genre. So there's that word coming into play. So know what you're expected to write. The second part is going to tell you what you should do before you get started. So it'll remind you of things that you should read, things that you should consider, your brainstorming. And then the next part is going to go over what you should do during and after writing. I'll give you some reminders, some things to consider as you're drafting so that you can be successful. And I'll also give you some tips of how to get some feedback on this particular piece of writing. And then the final part of your assignment sheet is going to go over due dates and grading. This will be pretty much repeated word for word on every assignment sheet you have, except of course the due date will change. But it will remind you that you have to turn in a power draft and a reflection document. It's going to remind you of how I'm going to provide you with feedback so that you can revise for your final portfolio. It'll remind you that if you turn in the work late, I won't be able to give you feedback in a timely manner myself, and that if you've gone past 2 weeks and I haven't seen your power draft, I'm going to need to contact your advisor and suggest you retake the course, especially considering the final grading criteria. And I'll also remind you, you won't receive a specific grade on your power drafts. You're going to propose your own grading at the end of the course in your portfolio. So you've probably heard me use the word rubric. This refers to a document that is how it gives you criteria and how you would assess that criteria. You've probably heard me use the word portfolio. It in this class refers to all of the culmination of all your projects put together. It's very similar to, you might hear the word e-portfolio tossed around a little bit at MTSU, which it refers to your MT Engage courses. But in this class, it's just, again, all of your projects put together with a cover letter at the end of the course. And finally, rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, logos. We're going to have a separate video on that, but you'll probably hear me refer to that this semester. So if you have any questions about any of these terms, please feel free to ask me in the Ask Me Anything board. And I'm looking forward to getting started with you this semester.